Episode 141. What are you doing? Lightning cultivation? Jacob was interested.
Yes, lightning cultivation is a type of cultivation that relies on the 5 elements, but would be above the 5 elements at the end. It's mighty, but also very difficult to cultivate. Therefore, it was lost within the human cultivation world.
Julia interrupted and said,
All cultivators are afraid of the heavenly tribulations because they only cultivate 1 or at most 2 elements, and all other elements are eliminated from their body to secure the purity of that 1 element. In the heavenly tribulation, the cultivators would have to fight against the lightning, which represents 5 elements, using only that 1 element. That's also why dual elemental cultivators have an easier time going through the tribulation,
Jade explained. Then what should I do? Jacob asked immediately.
What you have to do first is to secure the balance of the 5 elements in your body. Every single element has to be uniform. You can build the foundation from there and gradually increase it,
Julia said. Jacob looked to his left and then to his right. The 2 sisters surrounded him and made him feel slightly dizzy. I have a little suggestion for you guys, Jacob said.
What do you want, Master?
They asked curiously. I am unable to distinguish between the 2 of you, so how about this? From now on, Jade will leave her hair open and Julia will have a ponytail. What do you think? Jacob suggested. It seems like he would be interacting with them a lot more, but being unable to distinguish them would really be a problem.
We'll follow whatever you say, Master.
Jade and Julia stood up right away and walked towards the washroom. Jacob didn't know how to react. He said it casually and didn't expect them to go and change their hairstyles right away. After a few minutes, Jade and Julia walk out of the washroom. Their hair was down to their waists, but now one had a ponytail and the other had left her hair open to fall on her shoulders. Although they were still wearing the same clothes, it was obvious who was the older sister and who was the younger sister.
All right, Master, let's get back on topic,
Jade said.
Let Julia and I help you with the first step of cultivating the sword shadow technique.
How are you guys going to help me? Jacob asked in confusion.
By teaching you how to balance the 5 elements in your body.
Jade smiled sweetly.
Master, take off your shirt.
What? Jacob asked as he took a step back.
Yes, just trust us and take your shirt off,
Julia said, trying to look reassuring. Jacob was still skeptical about it, but looking at their determined faces, he decided to listen to them. He turned around to get some false sense of privacy and nervously unbuttoned his shirt as the sisters patiently waited for him to turn back to them.
You just have to practice the most fundamental spirit concentration scroll,
Jade told him as soon as Jacob turned his face back to them.
We are going to touch you now,
Julia said as a warning to Jacob right before he felt their hands on his chest. This was an extremely weird feeling for him, as he had never been that close to any girl before, and he had just met these girls a couple of days ago. He had half a mind to stop them and ask them to call it a day, but one look at their faces told him that they meant business. Both the sisters were absolutely calm and looked as if they didn't even notice Jacob's embarrassment. Jacob didn't ask any more. He knew that they were definitely helping him. Therefore, he closed his eyes, threw away the random thoughts, and cultivated the spirit concentration scroll. He was still unfamiliar with the content of the sword shadow technique. However, he was very familiar with the spirit concentration scroll because he practiced it every day, whenever he could, even while sleeping. The 5 elements quickly revolved and circulated in his body. Jade and Julia's expressions became serious as they frowned and didn't dare ignore any details.
Metal, 12%. Wood, 16%. Water, 54%. Fire, 11%. Earth, 7%.
He didn't know if it was Jade or Julia who reported the numbers.
It's done, Master.
Their crisp voices sounded again, and they moved their hands away from Jacob's body. Jacob opened his eyes and saw a piece of paper beside Julia, and some data was recorded on it. Julia handed the piece of paper to Jacob and said,
This is the ratio of the 5 elements in your body. According to this data, you need to strengthen the absorption of the 4 elements, metal, wood, fire, and earth. The earth element has an especially low ratio.
Jacob took over the piece of paper and felt like he was looking at his report card. You guys know the statistics? Jacob looked at the data and put the piece of paper on the side.
Yeah, we've been learning mathematics lately and found many things quite useful.
Jade smiled again and said. At the same time, Sophie suddenly came out of her room. She saw the sisters sitting closely beside Jacob and asked, in an accusatory tone,
What is going on here?
Jacob couldn't understand why she was angry so suddenly and wanted to explain, but Sophie asked abruptly again,
What are you doing, sitting there without clothes?
Jacob was reminded that he was still shirtless. Seeing Sophie's upset expression, he was clueless on how to explain the situation to her. Jade was going to say something back, but she was pulled back by Julia. They couldn't afford to offend the Dragon King, no matter how powerful they were. Liam, who stayed in the master bedroom looking at all kinds of documents, heard the noise outside, rubbed his head, and pretended he didn't hear anything. He was merely an elder. He didn't have any right to speak between the princess and her fiancé. Before Jacob could open his mouth, Sophie went back to her room and slammed the door. Jade and Julia made eye contact with each other and both felt sympathetic toward Jacob. They thought,
Looks like we have unknowingly created a problem for the Master.
It's getting late. You guys go back and rest, too, Jacob said to them.
Yes, Master.
Jade and Julia both stood up. When they returned to their room, Jacob looked at the paper holding his statistics again and sighed. He closed his eyes and began cultivating. Suddenly, a room's door opened again. Jacob opened his eyes and saw Sophie holding a pillow as she stood outside her door.
Hey, I can't fall asleep,
she said with a frown. Then I'll sleep with you? Jacob thought for a bit and asked. Seeing Jacob's reaction, Sophie's eyes widened.
No, that's not necessary.
Then what can I do? Jacob looked at her innocently. Sophie held the pillow and walked in front of Jacob. She thought for a bit, sat on the sofa, and curled up her legs.
There's a way I can fall asleep.
What is it? Jacob asked her.
You could talk to me till I'm sleepy again,
Sophie said. Jacob was stunned. Am I that boring to you? He asked with a frown.
No, that's not what I meant. Just talk about anything.
She put the pillow behind her head, raised her legs, and hesitated for a bit before laying them on Jacob's thighs. Jacob smiled slightly at the gesture because he knew that somewhere this was Sophie's way of offering an olive branch for her behavior earlier. Okay, then I'll talk about something random. There was this one time when Grandma caught me secretly keeping a pet frog in my room. Jacob simply talked about his childhood, recalling random memories, even if they weren't very interesting. Sophie opened her eyes and leaned her head on the pillow as she listened to Jacob talk. She smiled a little at the funny bits and stayed silent the whole time. Suddenly, Jacob asked her, "What did you say to Kathy at the stadium today?"
Why? Are you nervous about what I might have said?
Sophie asked. Just... Jacob's face turned slightly pale and he explained, asking,
"You like her, right?"
Sophie sat up suddenly and asked. "No," Jacob replied. Sophie glanced at him and said,
"Whatever you say."
"What did you say to her?" Jacob asked again.
"Not telling you."
Sophie raised her head.
"You can go ask her yourself."
Jacob frowned at her, as he knew he wouldn't be able to get it out of her. Episode 142, Late Night Conversations.
"Keep talking,"
Sophie said, lying down again and using her small heels to kick Jacob's thighs. He let go of the topic about Kathy because he knew that Sophie wouldn't budge and tell him what she talked to Kathy about. Jacob grabbed her small feet and put them on his thighs. He was running out of memories to tell her about, so he suddenly switched to his college life. He told her about his friends and what they liked to do in their free time. Sophie realized that the topic had changed and was confused, but she didn't say anything as she squinted her eyes and started to listen. She paid attention to everything he was saying and laughed when he told her about something his roommates did. She could feel the tiredness seeping in again, and her eyes were drooping, but she kept listening to Jacob's stories for as long as she could. Jacob wasn't aware of the time, as he kept talking to her about the most random of things. When he checked the clock, he realized that it was way past his bedtime. He was tired from talking, so he turned around to look at Sophie and found that she had fallen asleep. He tickled the bottom of her feet lightly, and Sophie pulled back her feet slightly but didn't wake up. Seeing her acting so soft, Jacob couldn't help but smile fondly at her cuteness. He patted her calves lightly with his hands, but she still didn't wake up. This made Jacob certain that she had definitely fallen asleep. He wanted her to go back to bed to sleep comfortably, but it seemed like a bad idea to wake her up now. Jacob sighed as he put his hands on her back and beneath her legs soundlessly, and he picked her up slowly from the sofa. Jacob carried her easily, as Sophie's weight felt nothing to him compared to the 2 heavy bracelets that he carried on his wrists every day. He walked as slowly as he could so Sophie's sleep wouldn't be disturbed. After passing through the living room and walking towards Sophie's assigned room, Jacob put her on the bed slowly as he could feel her breathe softly. Jacob smiled, lightly knocked her on the forehead for her ferocious attitude earlier, and then put a blanket on top of her. He made a mental note to later explain the situation she had walked into. He didn't want them to have any misunderstandings. The only reason he didn't tell her now was that their conversation's main goal was to get her to sleep and not rile her up more. He stood there for a moment to admire how quiet and peaceful she looked while sleeping, as opposed to her loud and jumpy personality. He left the room quietly, and the whole apartment was already silent. Jacob looked at the clock, and it was already past midnight. Jacob then thought that his dad and mom must probably be home already. The careless Liam didn't even prepare a blanket for him. Jacob sighed slightly and could do nothing but curl up on the sofa for the night. The morning arrived, and Jacob had cultivated in his sleep, so he didn't feel tired at all. The apartment gradually became livelier. Even though Jade and Julia were literally from heaven, they didn't know how to make breakfast, and Liam couldn't cook either. Jacob could cook, but it didn't taste that good, so he didn't want to embarrass himself, and Sophie was definitely out of the question. So, the 5 of them went downstairs to a small restaurant to eat, and then Liam drove them to school and college. There were dozens of elders assisting Dracon in the city, and Sophie grew up in their care. No one would dare provoke any of the elders, so it wouldn't be too much to call Sophie actually treated like a princess, even among the humans. Liam drove Sophie to school first before heading to the university. This weekend, Sophie was going to a neighboring city with her parents to visit an elder. Jacob looked at the road outside and felt somewhat strange. He slept over at the vice principal's home and took the vice principal's car to school. Jade and Julia, who were used to it by now, looked out of the window to enjoy the morning breeze. They had listened to Jacob, as usual, and had made their hairstyles accordingly, one open and one in a ponytail. The car entered the school and stopped behind the administrative building. Jacob walked down with the sisters and rushed towards his dorm when no one else was around. If anyone found out that he came to school in Liam's car with the sisters, he didn't know what kind of bloodstorm it would cause. His roommates, minus Sam, came up to him immediately when he returned to the dorm.
"Jacob, I admire you so much. You're my idol."
"Where's Sam?" Ignoring their comments, Jacob asked them.
"He went out to eat with the basketball team last night and drank a lot, so he's still sleeping,"
the guys answered. Jacob nodded and grabbed his textbooks. "Let's go to class."
"Hey, you're so calm."
One of them dragged Jacob aside and said,
"Be honest with us. Who are the girls with the vice principal?"
"What's up? Why are you so excited?" Jacob glanced at him.
"All the guys at school were asking about them after the basketball game. Their cheerleading video has become the most viewed video on our school's blog,"
he said, and turned on his cell phone.
"Look here."
Jacob came close to take a look and saw Jade and Julia as they waved the pom-poms and danced. "It's a normal cheer routine. What is so special about it?" Jacob asked.
"It's not about the dance, you idiot. They look so gorgeous."
The guy took his cell phone back excitedly.
"They are going to be the most popular girls in the school."
"Can there be two most popular girls?" Jacob frowned.
"Twins are allowed. Didn't you know that? Even the people from the nearby universities want to check them out,"
his friend said proudly. Jacob was speechless. If this guy put half his enthusiasm toward his studies, his grades would probably be at the top of their department. Seeing Jacob grabbing his books and walking out of the room, the guys followed behind him and yelled,
Jacob, you're so close to the twins. Invite them to dinner with us."
They couldn't understand Jacob anymore. They used to think that Jacob couldn't even find a girlfriend. But unexpectedly, all the girls Jacob was interacting with lately were all on the goddess level. As they walked to the cafeteria, Jacob found that the banner promoting the basketball game had been changed. "Welcome famous artist Tom Lester to our university for a personal art exhibition." Jacob turned to his friends and asked, "Who's Tom Lester?" One of the guys wanted to show off his knowledge and said immediately,
"I've heard about Tom Lester. He's actually pretty well known around North America. I think he's so famous because he looks handsome. He has had some exhibitions and has fans of his own."
Seeing Jacob becoming somewhat interested, he continued,
"He's coming here for an exhibition next week. I heard that the girls from the fine arts department are totally into him. They've been excited for the past 2 days when they heard that he was coming."
Jacob hadn't been living in the dorm lately, so he didn't know much about the activities around the college. Having the girls go all crazy over him. He sounds like a jock, Jacob thought, before deciding that he wasn't interested in knowing more about the artist anymore. Then he walked towards the academic building. Friday's classes were probably the most relaxed classes of the week. Jacob and the guys only needed to take 2 fundamental classes in the morning and could go back home after lunch. When Jacob and his roommates arrived in the classroom, it was almost full. However, Ryan saved them a few seats at the back. Jacob sat down, clutched his textbooks, and stared at the front of his book as he always did. However, he noticed that Kathy hadn't come today. Her usual seat was empty. It was a minute before class started, but Kathy was absent. At first, Jacob got worried as it was Kathy. Kathy, who never missed a class even if she was sick. But then he let it go, thinking that she must be spending time with her dad, who was back in the country after so long. After the lecture started, Ryan came up to him.
"Jacob, you did great in yesterday's game."
Jacob smiled at him and continued to organize his tutoring materials. Seeing Jacob didn't reply, Ryan came close to him again and said, "Jacob, why don't you introduce us to those twin girls?" "Get lost." Jacob waved his hand and shooed him away. "They are first-year students, and they are super beautiful as well. Ask them out for a meal." Ryan continued to instigate. Ryan finally used his final move when he saw that Jacob was still doing his own thing and didn't bother to talk to him. "I have important news. Do you want to know?" "Speak." Jacob finally raised his head. "It seems like Michael wants to pursue the twins," Ryan said. Episode 143. Michael, yet again. Jacob sneered in disdain when he heard Michael's name and continued to organize the tutoring materials. He thought it was an important piece of news, but it turned out to be such a trivial matter. Jade and Julia were both 7th level cultivation masters, and their existence was something Inspector Susan dreaded. They could kill Michael just by lifting a finger, so he didn't need to worry about this at all. Ryan was surprised when he saw Jacob ignoring this news. Why doesn't Jacob care about this news? Isn't he afraid that Michael will cause trouble? Ryan thought. You guys know that all the girls have been excited lately. The legendarily handsome Tom Lester is hosting a personal exhibition at our college next week. The guys, who were on the other side of the table, chatted at a low volume. Ryan was bored with Jacob's reaction and went up to them immediately. I know! He's the guy with the golden eyes, right? I've seen him on TV before. He looked all right, just slightly worse compared to me. Golden eyes? Jacob stopped moving the pen in his hand and concentrated. He then focused his hearing on that conversation. Now, he could not only hear Ryan's conversation, but also the girls' discussion in the front of the room.
I heard that Tom Lester is really good looking. Don't know how he looks in person, though. I have his poster. It was from a magazine. Many female celebrities seem to like him. His paintings have received many awards internationally. I heard that his oil painting is also very good. This exhibition is his first time showcasing his oil paintings. Many well-known figures from the art community are coming too.
The few girls in the class discussed it in whispers, and they seemed excited as well. Even the girls in the engineering department have heard of Tom Lester. It seems that he is indeed handsome and talented, Jacob thought.
And his eyes are golden and very charming,
a girl said again.
Golden? From wearing colored contact lenses? No, the golden color is actually of his pupils, completely natural. Rumors say that he's part Italian and part French, which is why he's good looking. He went to France for 2 years and has just come back,
another girl said. Jacob could only obtain this small amount of information after listening to their conversations, and so he began paying attention to the lecture and continued to organize the tutoring materials. The bracelets had been getting heavier and heavier lately, and it probably meant that his cultivation has been improving. According to the sisters, he would succeed in reaching first level as long as the 5 elements in his body reached equilibrium. There were only 2 weeks left until Sophie's birthday party. The 2 lectures in the morning ended. Jade and Julia appeared at the entrance of the classroom on time.
Master!
They both yelled when they saw Jacob walking out. Jacob felt like his scalp had become numb and his spine turned chilly from the guys' intense, jealous gazes. What are you guys doing here again? Jacob's tone sounded helpless. However, the guys wanted to stomp Jacob to death when they heard his harsh tone.
To go home with you,
they answered. Ryan and the others, who stood on the side, almost had their eyes pop out when they heard this answer. Fine, let's go. Jacob waved his hand helplessly because this was not a good place to talk. Seeing Jacob leading the two girls to the stairs, all the guys began murmuring among themselves. Walking out of the academic building, Jacob still felt like many eyes were on him, yet it didn't feel like people were surrounding him anymore. "Why are you guys going back home with me?" Jacob asked them.
"We told you the last time. We want to visit your grandma,"
Jade said. Jacob sighed again. This isn't necessary at all. Grandma had already met Sophie and Kathy. She probably wouldn't be able to take it if Jade and little Julia were also added into the mix. Jade and Julia didn't talk, but insisted on following Jacob. It looked like they would follow even if Jacob were on a bus. "Jacob!" Suddenly, a sharp voice came from the side. Jacob turned his head and saw Susan standing underneath the shade of a tree not too far away. Jacob saw that the guys passing by were looking at him with murderous gazes. He endured the discomfort of being at the center of the attention, led his two unwanted followers, and walked towards her. "What's the matter, Susan?" he asked her, though glad that she had saved him from going home with the girls, for a while at least. "You picked the Sword Shadow Scroll as your main cultivation technique?" Susan asked, directly. "Yeah," Jacob nodded. "I have been too busy for the past 2 days and didn't have time to come see you." "You're not busy, you're just afraid of me, right?" Susan glanced at him with a knowing look. "Don't worry, I won't add any imprisonment bracelets to you again. I'm just here to remind you that the Sword Shadow Scroll isn't easy to cultivate. You should change to another one when there's still time." "I'm not changing. This cultivation technique is slower, but it's stable," Jacob replied. Susan didn't persuade further, since Jacob had already made up his mind. So she changed the subject and said, "There are still 2 weeks until Soph's birthday. Starting next week, come to cultivate in my office for 2 hours every day." "Okay," Jacob accepted right away. "Also, there was a second-level river dragon playing in your basketball game yesterday, but it seemed like he was just there for fun and didn't try his best," Susan said. "Second level?" Jacob was slightly surprised because he had no idea about it. "When you're at the first level, you'll be able to see other dragons," Susan said. Jacob nodded. They looked at each other and were silent for a few seconds. "That's it," Susan said. A cold wind blew. Jacob thought there was more, but who knew that Susan was already done talking? She really was a no-nonsense person. Susan turned around and walked towards her office. Jacob looked at her and couldn't help but sigh when he thought that he had been skipping their sessions quite often recently and had to go to her office for training every day now. "Jade, Julia, don't follow me on Soph's birthday. There will be many hidden masters appearing. You guys won't be safe following me around." Jacob walked towards the entrance of the school and said, "Yes, we won't participate in the Dragon Tribe's gathering. However, we heard from Elder Liam that it'd be safe if you cultivated to the first level," Julia said with a smile. From her perspective, it seemed like cultivating to the first level was a very easy thing to do. Jacob returned to his dorm, put his textbooks back in the room, took his small bag, and prepared to bring some snacks back over the weekend. Meanwhile, Jade and Julia waited downstairs. If the guys saw this scene, they would probably fight Jacob to death due to their intense jealousy. "Such a glorious day, huh, sophomore?" When Jacob walked to the bus stop, Michael's voice suddenly sounded. Jacob turned around and saw Michael leading a bunch of his henchmen and was actually waiting for him near the bus stop. Jade and Julia felt the hostility, walked up 2 steps spontaneously, and blocked Michael. "Hey, you have 2 little bodyguards," Michael swung his arm and said with a smile. He was wearing a sleeveless vest that showed off his solid muscles. After all, he had practiced rock climbing for many years, Jade, Julia, step back, Jacob asked them patiently. He was worried that if they fought without knowing the consequences, Michael would be knocked into the sky. I know that I screwed up the recruitment for your club last time and you didn't feel good about it. You can come at me if you want. Jacob took 2 steps forward and said, We can even arm wrestle since you want to show off your muscles so badly. Jacob was wearing a shirt that he had been wearing for 2 days, and he couldn't compare himself with the handsome Michael in terms of appearance. Also, his skinny arms underneath his sleeves couldn't even be comparable to Michael's biceps. Michael indeed endured a week of anger. However, until the basketball game, Jacob was a member of Kyle's team, and Michael didn't dare provoke Kyle. Since Jacob decided not to join the basketball team, Michael had one less thing to worry about and decided to fight against Jacob since Jacob was on a roll right now. Not only was he close to Susan, but also the twin girls who had just enrolled at the school. They followed him everywhere and made everyone envious. Michael wasn't scared anymore to reveal his motive. He was jealous. Jade and Julia were the vice principal's granddaughters. Other people didn't dare pursue them, but he was not afraid. The moment they appeared on the basketball court, he felt like he had to pursue them. Susan was his long-term goal, and these 2 beauties would suffice for now. No matter what methods he had to use, he had to get to know them and approach them. They were beautiful girls who would make people's hearts skip a beat. If he got to date one of them, his university life would be complete. There was a bench in the waiting area at the bus stop. Michael took him up on the challenge and sat down. Jacob rolled up his sleeves and sat down as well. They locked hands. Michael's henchman counted down. 3, 2, 1. Almost immediately, Michael's hand was pressed underneath Jacob's. Jacob wiped his hand, stood up, and waved his hand. Let's go, Jade, Julia. The bus is here. Jade and Julia didn't even look at Michael. They followed Jacob closely and hopped onto the bus. Episode 144. Unexpected Guests. The bus began to move slowly. Jacob opened the window and the warm breeze blew in from outside. Many students inside the bus kept on glancing at the 3 of them. Now that the 2 gorgeous girls always followed him around, Jacob couldn't be low-key even if he wanted to. Feeling the warm breeze, Jacob decided to ignore his surroundings, and there was only one way to do that. He took out his cell phone and dialed Sophie's number. Are you at the airport? Jacob asked her.
Still have half an hour until boarding,
Sophie replied over the phone. The weather forecast said that there'd be light rain these 2 days. It's a bit chilly. Remember to dress warm, Jacob said.
Yeah, I will.
Sophie smiled as she heard the concern in Jacob's voice. Then she told him,
You take care too.
I will, Jacob said. Are you coming back on Sunday?
Yes, in the evening,
Sophie answered. Remember to come back and do your assignments, Jacob said.
Oh, come on, cut it out.
Sophie rolled her eyes, but smiled anyway. They talked for a bit more before Sophie had to go, so they said their goodbyes and hung up. The bus moved up stop by stop. Jacob used the sword shadow technique secretly to absorb the 5 elements. He absorbed water elements without any obstacles, but it was difficult for him to sense the other elements and absorb them. The more anxious he was, the more chaotic his mood became. Soon, the 5 elements mingled around him, and he couldn't even tell where the water elements were.
Master, you can't be anxious when you cultivate,
Jade said when she saw Jacob frowning as if he was obsessed. Jacob opened his eyes and smiled. This earth element is indeed hard to feel. Julia, who was beside him, covered her mouth and laughed.
To sense the earth element, it obviously will be best to be standing on the ground. You're sitting on a metal chair and trying to sense the energy of the earth. How could you make progress focusing on the wrong thing?
That's it. Jacob understood completely. When he cultivated the Spirit Concentration Scroll, he absorbed pure but mixed energy of 5 elements, with more water within. If he wanted to absorb a single elemental essence, he had to go to the specific places to cultivate.
Your amber is a water elemental accessory. It can help you sense the water element, and that's why the water element is the most abundant element inside your body.
Julia looked at Jacob's chest and said. Jacob touched the little accessory that Sophie gave him and nodded.
Master, there seems to be a fluctuation in the array formation,
Jade suddenly said. Fluctuation of array formation? Jacob was confused.
It seems like some people are fighting here.
Jade nodded. Jacob looked in the direction they were pointing, but saw nothing.
Sorry, we forgot that you aren't at first level yet.
Jade grabbed Jacob's palm, and pure energy of the 5 elements entered into Jacob's body from his arm. Jacob suddenly felt he had broken through to the first level, and his body became light. His gaze followed the direction that Jade pointed towards, and he saw 2 people inside a dark red sphere in the sky. Blue lights could be seen on them. He couldn't hear the sounds, but could see icy rain flashing and a white sword swinging inside the dark red sphere. It seemed to be very intense. Julia watched for a while and said,
2 4th-level juniors are fooling around. Yeah.
Jade let go of Jacob's palm.
Elder Liam mentioned that in the regulations of the Dragon Tribe, a dark red zone means a practice battle, and a white zone symbolizes a battle of life and death.
As the pure energy exited his body, Jacob's head felt dizzy. He looked up again at the sky and saw the blue sky, white clouds, and sunny weather, and everything was back to normal.
After a while, it will be the princess's birthday. It seems like some seniors have already brought their playful children and arrived early in the city,
Julia said. After they chatted for a while, they suddenly noticed Jacob's confused look. Then, Jade said in a hurry,
Oh, I'm sorry, Master. I suddenly took away the 5 elemental essences and forgot that you're not used to it.
It's fine, Jacob waved. But Jade's words, I forgot that you aren't at the first level yet, struck him hard. After all, he would still be a mortal without reaching the first level. After stepping into the first level, he would really enter the door of cultivation, and the world he sees would be totally different.
Master, we can give you the 5 elemental essences and make you break through to the first level. However, the realm won't be stable if you don't cultivate it on your own,
Jade said in a comforting voice.
I believe that you will be very strong in the future.
Julia also tried to chime in. Jacob smiled. Having 2 followers at top grade 7th level gave him quite a bit of pressure.
Master, you actually have your own merits, like English, advanced mathematics, physics, and you play basketball too,
Julia said again immediately. All right, you don't have to comfort me. I'll work hard to cultivate, Jacob said as he waved them off. Jade and Julia just smiled at him sweetly. They didn't know why they felt happy when they followed Jacob around. It might be because of their curiosity or interest. In their minds, Jacob had a temperament that was hard to describe. Most of the time, he had a gentle character that tolerated everything, but sometimes he had the courage to cut everything off. They never knew that mortals could also be this interesting. It was still sunny outside as the bus traveled at a moderate speed. The bus stopped at its usual stop near the beach. Jacob carried his bag and walked to his small villa near the sea. Jade and Julia followed Jacob under the scorching sun. This part of the road would take half an hour to walk. However, the sisters weren't as weak as they seemed. Their stamina was better than Jacob's. When they arrived at the house, Jacob opened the door and still didn't know how to explain things to Grandma. All of a sudden, he heard a girl's voice inside the house. They were both surprised when they saw each other. Jacob saw Kathy wearing a white apron and carrying a pan in her hands. Kathy saw Jacob carrying his bag home with the girls. "Why are you here?" Jacob asked foolishly. "You're back, Jacob?" Walter walked out of his room when he heard Jacob's voice. "Kathy was a bit drunk yesterday, so she slept over at our house and didn't go to college today either." "Who are they?" "Oh, my classmates, Jade and Julia. They wanted to visit my house," Jacob answered.
"Hello, Mr. Brown,"
Jade and Julia said sweetly to Walter. Walter was slightly dazed. Then, seeing Kathy was carrying a fish, he said, "Oh, you steamed the fish? Finish it then. Mom really likes fish."
Yeah."
Kathy nodded, brought the fish, and walked into the kitchen without looking at Jacob. Mila walked out of the kitchen after a moment. She saw the two pretty girls standing beside Jacob, and her facial expression changed.
"Why did you bring more girls back home?" "Hello, Mrs. Brown,"
Jade and Julia called Mila sweetly again. Mila was originally going to pull a face, but seeing they were being so polite, she couldn't bring herself to be too mean to them. Her tone softened.
"Never mind. Since you guys are here, let's eat together."
Kathy drank quite a bit of alcohol last night and spoke some gibberish at the end. Mila felt sorry for her and had her stay over. She wasn't the type of evil mother who would kick guests out of the house. Even though she had some complaints in mind, she didn't want to show them on the outside.
"Have your classmates sit down. Lunch will be ready soon."
Mila turned after she finished speaking and went to help Kathy in the kitchen. Kathy was the star cook today and was going to make something delicious. Mila was only an assistant. Jacob felt snubbed and felt his mind was in turmoil because he didn't expect Kathy to be at home. He pointed at the sofa in the living room. "Jade, Julia, find a place to sit."
"Yes, master."
Jade and Julia nodded and found a spot to sit in the living room. Jacob put down his bag and walked into the smoky kitchen. Kathy, who wore a white apron, was at the stove, making something. Her hair was pulled up, and it was obvious that she had been working very hard in the kitchen. She didn't say anything when she saw Jacob squeeze in. She lowered her head to look at the braised pork in another pot. The heat was steaming. Her face was red and formed an apparent contrast with her pale white neck. Jacob could only ask Mila quietly, "Mom, did Kathy stay at our house yesterday?"
"Yes, she and Ray slept at our house yesterday. Kathy stayed over in your room, and I slept with your grandma,"
Mila said. "She stayed over in my bedroom?" Jacob felt weird.
"Kathy seemed to be a bit drunk yesterday. She felt dizzy this morning, so I didn't let her go to college,"
Mila said.
"She said you're coming back at noon and wanted to make a delicious meal for you."
"Mila!" Kathy, who seemed to be concentrating on cooking the braised pork, suddenly interrupted Mila and corrected her.
"I'm cooking for you guys, not just for him."
I guess they are on a first-name basis now, Jacob thought.
Okay.
Mila nodded with a smile and looked at Jacob.
"Anyhow, why don't you thank Kathy?"
"Thank you very much, Kathy," Jacob yelled out. He was feeling extremely awkward at the moment. Seeing Jacob act awkwardly, Kathy smiled.
"All right, it's nothing. Just thanking your parents for treating us to dinner yesterday."
She looked very pretty, even though she was quite messy after all the cooking. "Well, thank you anyway." Jacob said as he stepped back and left the kitchen. He found himself sweating all over his forehead and realized cooking wasn't an easy task. He returned to the living room and found that his grandmother had appeared magically, grabbed the sisters' hands, and was now chit-chatting with them. Episode 145, Meeting Grandma. Grandma won't say no to anyone. He walked over. "Grandma, they are Jade and Julia. They came with me today to visit the beach." "Yeah, I saw them yesterday. Such pretty girls." Grandma smiled and said. The sisters and his grandmother seemed to get along well. They could chat about all kinds of strange anecdotes, all sorts of local customs, and all kinds of legends about the gods and monsters. Jacob couldn't help but admire their knowledge. "Jacob, these girls are so nice. After chatting with them for a while, I feel a lot better," Grandma said as she stood up. Jade and Julia looked at each other and smiled secretively. When Grandma grabbed their hands, they also used the energy of the 5 elements to adjust Grandma's body and eliminate the remaining illnesses from her body. This result was way more effective than Helen's way of using ingredients, elixirs, and pills. Not everybody can touch their bodies. If one could touch their hands, it would be a profound fortune. If Grandma knew about their identities, she would have known that she had touched the immortal essence. "You girls are great and know so much about our history. Visit here often during the weekends from now on." Grandmother looked at them pleasantly and said, "Sure," they promised before Jacob had a chance to interrupt. Visiting here every weekend to talk to Grandma while nursing her body at the same time would count as repaying Jacob for saving their lives. Jacob could only sigh when he saw Grandma, Jade, and Julia smiling at each other. Whatever keeps Grandma smiling at this age is great. As long as she's happy, she can do whatever she wants. "Lunchtime." Mila carried the dishes out of the kitchen. Kathy also followed her from the kitchen. She had already taken off the apron and let her hair down. "Come, Kathy, come and sit beside me." Grandma waved at Kathy as an act of adoration. The table was set with lots of dishes, and every single one seemed to be delicious in its color, flavor, and taste. It was obvious Kathy put lots of effort into cooking this lunch. Jacob didn't expect Kathy to be so good at cooking. At a young age, her cooking skills were on par with Helen's. Ray and Walter, who were talking about national affairs, came to the living room when they smelled the aroma. Walter laughed brightly. "Kathy is our big hero today." "I just wanted to do something nice." Kathy smiled elegantly. "Would you stay with us this weekend, Kathy?" Grandma asked in a tone of inquiry. "No, I'll be heading back after lunch." Kathy glanced at Jacob and the 2 unexpected guests and said. After lunch, Jade and Julia were very interested in touring Jacob's room. Mila wasn't fond of these sisters, but she didn't say anything because Grandma liked them. Jacob couldn't stand the harassment of the sisters and could only bring them to his bedroom. Kathy also followed them because she still had some things left in Jacob's bedroom. The bedroom window faced the sea, and the view was great. The first thing people saw when they opened the door was a big glass jar filled with shells resting by the bedside. Every time Jacob entered, he would see this jar. Little Carrot collected the shells inside the jar. Seeing these shells would remind him of the things that happened in the past. Little Carrot used to chase him on the beach, and sometimes she would trip, tumble on the ground, and cry. Jakey, who pretended to be a grown-up, would scold her and yet help her get up. The moment the group walked into the room, Jacob's and Kathy's eyes landed on the glass jar. At that moment, Jacob suddenly discovered that the shells had moved from their original position. He guessed that when Kathy stayed over in his bedroom last night, she opened the jar, poured the shells out, and counted them one by one. Every single shell symbolized a small piece of memory.
I wore your mom's clothes today. I'm just going to grab my clothes from here.
Kathy walked to the bedside and picked up a plain-looking white t-shirt. While Jacob and Kathy were talking, Jade and Julia set up a small, invisible 5-elemental array formation. This array formation could help Jacob sense and absorb the 5 elements. Finished touring? This isn't anything special, right? Jacob looked at the twins and said. Jade stuck her tongue out.
It is very normal.
Jacob glanced at her, didn't say anything, and left the room. Kathy, who held her clothes in her hand, felt uncomfortable when she saw that the sisters were already so close to Jacob in just a few days.
Why don't you kids go to the beach?
Grandma didn't want Kathy to go back so early, so she made a suggestion.
Grandma, I still have to visit my relatives with my dad. I'll find another time to come and visit you.
Kathy smiled at Grandma and said,
That's true. Your dad rarely comes back, and you guys haven't visited relatives yet. Fine, spend some time with your dad first. From now on, we're a family. Do come to visit me sometime, Grandma said.
I'll drop them off in the city, Mom, Walter said. Could you also bring Jade and Julia along to the city? Jacob said right away. If I don't send them back, who knows how long they would want to stay, he thought. Jade and Julia looked at Jacob sadly.
We wanted to help the master break through to the first level quickly, they thought.
Seeing Walter's car driving away, Jacob went back inside the house. Mila stood at the door, facing Grandma, and tried to advise her.
Mom, you shouldn't treat every girl so nicely. Jacob would get confused.
Grandma stopped smiling.
Aren't you and Walter going out of town for some conferences? She asked.
This time, it might take a month. It's a big project for the lab, and it involves many subjects,
Mila said in an apologetic tone.
That's right. If an old woman like me doesn't find a few companions, won't I be bored to death?
Grandma walked inside the house and said,
These 2 young girls, Jade and Julia, are pretty nice. Besides, their parents aren't with them, and they usually stay with their grandfather. Isn't that sad?
Mila felt like Grandma was actually hinting at Jacob, even though she was talking about the 2 girls. She knew it was her fault and could only save her opinions for later. It was a calm and tranquil weekend, and it passed by promptly. Jacob had been going for walks on the beach every morning and every evening for the past 2 days. Mila and Walter thought that something might be bothering him, but they didn't ask since they didn't want to make him feel more anxious. They didn't know that Jacob was trying to feel the earth elements and increase the earth element ratio in his body. Only when all 5 elements reach an absolute equilibrium of precisely 20% can the foundation be successfully built. It would be the first step in cultivating the Sword Shadow Scroll, as well as leveling up to the realms of first level. It was even difficult for a master like Susan to achieve this. Yet, it wasn't much of a problem for Jacob. Currently, he had Jade and Julia as 2 automatic detectors since they could precisely measure the 5 elements in his body. He only needed to adjust constantly, and then he could reach perfect equilibrium. This was just like mathematics. By continually measuring and valuing, he could reach equilibrium. cultivating using data was pretty much his original creation. Carrying a bag full of snacks and returning to the dorm, it was already 8 o'clock on Sunday night. Jacob sent Sophie a text message to make sure she arrived in the city. Jacob gave a big pack of snacks from his grandma to the surrounding dorm rooms. However, he was instantly attacked by the guys.
"Hand us the cell phone numbers of the twin sisters."
Noobs. Why would they need cell phones to contact the sisters? They will appear immediately in front of me if I shake the bell and think about them, Jacob thought.
Tom Lester!
Suddenly, shouts came from the other dorm buildings.
"Those crazy women are yelling again."
Ryan opened up the snacks and said in dissatisfaction. Sam walked over and closed the balcony door as he sighed. Over the weekend, he had been at the school for training and didn't go home. Every night, he endured the torturing shouts coming from the girls. What does this Tom Lester look like? Jacob was busy cultivating during the weekend and completely forgot to look up his picture online. The moon fell and the sun rose. Half a day's classes were over. As promised, Jacob went to Susan's office to cultivate. As he opened the door, he heard Susan yell, "Get out!" Soon after, Jacob felt tremendous pressure coming at him. Jacob grabbed the wall, barely able to stand on the ground. Then, he found Susan standing beside the window. She was holding a sword single-handedly as she pointed it at another person in the office. Episode 146, Golden Eyes. Susan was pointing at a man in a gray shirt with her sword when Jacob rushed into her office. That man immediately turned his eyes towards Jacob and whipped a ray of golden light at him without thinking. Suddenly, a blue ripple appeared in front of Jacob's chest. At that moment, Jacob felt a sharp pain as the necklace Susan gave him suddenly cracked.
How dare you!
Susan got furious. The white sword in her hand turned into a dash of white light and struck that man's chest. However, this man took back the golden light just as easily as he had thrown it and waved it casually to block Susan's white sword. A sharp noise was produced when the two weapons collided. The noise gave Jacob a headache. Jacob circulated the spirit concentration scroll to calm his mind down. After he took a second look at this man's weapon, he realized that it was a golden weaving shuttle. He looked out of the window at the students passing by, and he saw that they were chatting and laughing. No one realized that a fight was going on in Susan's office. After missing, Susan slashed the sword out single-handedly again and aimed it at the man's waist. However, the man in gray lowered the golden weaving shuttle lightly and blocked Susan's sword once again. Susan was done playing, so she used her full strength this time, and the noises from the battle even shook the array formation of her office. "If you keep on going, this little guy may not make it," the man said to Susan. Susan was unwilling to submit. She chopped down on that man's head, but it got easily blocked once again. Then, she took a few steps back, and the sword vanished from her hand. Even though Jacob was standing close by, the man paid no attention to him. He kept staring at Susan with a smile. "Sue, you look so attractive when you are mad." Susan frowned, showing that he was not welcome at all. "After just 2 years, you have advanced to mid-tier 8th level, half a tier higher than me. How hard-working have you been?" he continued. Susan stood quietly by the window. "But it's useless to level up in the cultivation realms without improving your techniques. Your sword technique is bad, as usual. How do you expect to defeat me with that?" the man smiled at Susan and said. He was talking casually, as if he was talking to a child, which only angered Susan more.
"Get lost! Get lost!"
Susan said in a sharp tone. That man laughed and finally turned to Jacob to look at him. He looked at him from head to toe, as if trying to figure something out. Then his eyes landed on Jacob's neck, which held the now cracked necklace. "You even gave the body protection necklace to him, and he could come into your office without authorization. Is he your disciple?" The man turned to Susan and asked. Susan kept quiet. He turned back to Jacob. "The 5 elements in his body are messed up, and he has no future. You have really gotten yourself a great disciple, Sue."
"I will say it one last time. Get lost."
Cold lights flashed in Susan's eyes. "It's no use cultivating that hard if you can't become a heavenly dragon. Do you really think that your hard work can get you to the heavenly realm? Don't you think that it would be a better choice to enjoy your life with me for a couple 100 years?" The man continued talking non-stop. Without saying anything, Susan's white sword appeared in her palm again. This time, it was surrounded by chilling lights and icy energy. All right, I'll go. No need to get feisty." That man finally got intimidated a little and backed himself to the door. Even Jacob could tell that Susan was furious this time. She would be using her ultimate technique if this man stuck around longer. Just when the man turned around and was ready to leave, Jacob noticed that the color of his pupils was golden. The dark red room became normal all of a sudden, and the sunlight shot right into the room through the window. Jacob could hear the birds chirping and smell the aroma of flowers again. The sword vanished from Susan's hand, and she glimpsed at Jacob. She schooled her expression from anger to indifference and said, as if nothing had happened,
"Sit down and cultivate."
Jacob knew better than to argue with her at the moment, so he just rubbed his chest where it hurt and sat opposite Susan.
"Although the technique I'm cultivating is different from yours, the basic concepts are the same. Since you picked the Sword Shadow Scroll, it is important to comprehend all 5 elements at the same time. Your Dragon Core is Soph's, so it has more water elements. Therefore, you should be cultivating a water elemental technique."
Susan slowly calmed down and said to Jacob. She was cultivating both metal and water elements at the same time and was a mid-tier 8th level cultivator. Her information was beneficial to Jacob. As for Jade and Julia, although they were mighty, their cultivation method was different from Jacob and Susan's. They were on the top tier, 7th level, but that was only a conversion to the cultivation levels of the Dragon Tribe. Therefore, they could offer Jacob some help and information, but they wouldn't be able to give him too much instruction on how to cultivate. 2 hours went by quickly, and the sandalwood incense had burned down as well. Jacob didn't want to bother Susan's cultivation too much since it was already 6 o'clock. He stood up and said, "Let's call it a day, Susan." She nodded and took a little golden pearl off her bracelet.
"This is a golden pearl and is a precious treasure. It functions the same as the water elemental amber Soph gave you. However, this would help you with the collection of metal elements."
She threw the pearl at Jacob, and he hastily caught it. Seeing his hesitation, Susan rolled her eyes at him and said coldly,
"Don't worry, there is no trick to this pearl."
Jacob unhooked his necklace and added the pearl to it. He now had Soph's amber and Susan's golden pearl. If he could collect wood, earth, and fire elemental pendants, this necklace would be complete with all 5 elements.
"I used this pearl with my cultivation before, and I'm giving it to you because I hope it will help you advance into 1st level soon,"
Susan continued. Jacob nodded. Although Susan was always cold, she had shown extreme patience with him.
Also, that jerk just attacked your necklace, and some of the array formations in it are damaged. It can only defend against one more attack of the same level at most. I don't have much time to restore the necklace for you now, so you have to be careful," Susan said. Jacob was going to ask about the man with the golden eyes, but he stopped himself after some consideration. He turned around and left the office. The priority for him was to reach the first level as soon as possible, so he didn't want to stick his hands into other random things. As he walked outside, Jacob felt the weight of the golden pearl on the necklace. It was the first piece of jewelry that Jacob had received that he thought was actually pretty. When Jacob was walking toward his dorm, he passed by the library and saw that it was still open. The billboard for the Tom Lester's personal art exhibition was still on the door. Jacob thought for a bit, then went inside. Tom Lester's personal art exhibition was being held in the lobby on the first floor. The show will be on Wednesday, 2 days from now. However, every space around the library was covered up by tall whiteboards. It seemed like, although the paintings weren't hung up yet, the whole place had already been decorated. Jacob scanned the place and was about to leave when Tom Lester, who was in a gray striped shirt, secretly sneaked up behind him. Episode 147, Tom Lester. Jacob suddenly felt intense pressure on his chest. His hand shot up to clutch his chest that was shooting with the sudden pain. He sensed that something was wrong and turned around immediately. It was the man who was in Susan's office earlier, standing behind him, sneering. The man lifted a finger and flicked it at Jacob. It looked like a practiced and well-mastered move. Jacob felt as if a giant hammer had smashed him, and it forced him to pounce out of the library. Thankfully, there were a few stairs at the door. Jacob stepped on them as he struggled to stand still. The necklace Susan had given him suddenly broke open, and the amber from Soph and the golden pearl from Susan both fell to the ground. This genius artist, who was popular in the media, only flicked his finger casually as if he was flicking off a speck of dust from his shirt. He was in a pair of light-colored pants, a gray shirt, and black shoes. He looked like he was in his late 20s, and his handsome face was impeccable. "Don't go near Susan in the future," he said lightly, as Jacob finally stood straight. He looked at Jacob condescendingly. If Michael's attitude was born out of jealousy, Tom Lester's was entirely out of spite. Now Jacob understood why the man had been so annoyed at seeing him in Susan's office. Jealousy is surely an ugly emotion. "What a gentleman," Jacob thought with a scoff. Out of nowhere, there went 2 rays of green light. Jade and Julia appeared by Tom's sides. Jacob thanked the Lord that the library was about to close, so there were no students nearby, because the sisters started attacking Tom without a word. They both aimed at his handsome face. He raised his hands to block the attacks, but Jade and Julia suddenly changed the direction of their hands. Tom got 2 hard slaps on his face. He stepped back to defend himself as the sisters stepped forward. He froze in shock from the sudden hit. Their hands went back to their original positions and gave him 2 more hits in the face. Tom tried to block it with both of his hands up and his head down. However, the sisters changed their moves and went through his defense as if it was nothing. 2 more hard slaps. "Stop it!" Jacob shouted. Jade and Julia immediately turned into 2 rays of green light and appeared by Jacob's sides. Tom looked up in panic. There were 6 clear handprints on his pretty face. If it weren't for Jacob's call, the girls would have kept going until his entire face was swollen. This is what's going to happen if you bully our master again,
Jade said angrily to him.
Are you all right, Master? We sensed that you were under attack, so we came over immediately,
Julia asked Jacob, softly, full of worries. Tom felt an intense burning pain in his cheeks, and he was both shocked and furious. He was surprised at how these two girls broke through his invisible shield so easily, and was mad at being slapped 6 times in a row. No one had ever hit him in the face before. If it weren't for Jacob, he might have gotten slapped some more. The sound of those slaps was still echoing in his head. After making sure that the twins of unknown background wouldn't attack again, Tom raised his arms and pointed at Jacob. Attacking an inspector? I am writing that down on my list. Jacob bent over to pick up the broken necklace and the precious accessories. Then, he left without a word. He had written this incident down on his list as well. Since he hadn't reached the first level, he wasn't able to use the first level techniques of Sword Shadow Scroll. Therefore, he had to wait until later to deal with this inspector who was at least on the 7th level. Those hits could be his temporary punishment for now. After all, Jade's and Julia's help couldn't be counted as his own. Tom Lester, who was on the stairs, suddenly remembered something when he saw the twin sisters leave with Jacob. Could he be that half-human, half-dragon Jacob? Let me see how long they will keep protecting you, he thought spitefully. In just a second, a wave of extremely strong power streamed down from above. Then, Tom heard a roar. How dare you bully members of my clan! An icicle landed precisely in front of him. It rubbed across his nose and ripped a large cut in his gray shirt at the same time. Tom, who was a mid-tier 7th level master, looked up at the sky in panic. Elder Kenneth? Yes, I came out of the seclusion cultivation. The hell with the heavenly tribulation. Soph's birthday is the most important thing right now. Kenneth's loud voice came through the sky. Jacob was already at the university gate, so he had no idea that Kenneth's appearance was scaring Tom to death to defend him. Jacob said to the sisters, You guys can go back now. I still need to go to Soph's house.
Master, take care on the way there.
The twin sisters were reluctant to say goodbye. Jacob simply smiled at them. Julia suddenly grabbed his wrist when he was boarding the bus.
Master, the necklace is fixed, but it is no longer a treasure, since it doesn't have the array formation anymore.
Thank you very much. Jacob took the necklace as he suddenly realized how careful and thoughtful the sisters were. The sisters watched Jacob as he got on the bus. Afterward, they looked into each other's eyes and went back to the school hand in hand. They were going to find Liam and go home together. The bus took Jacob to Sophie's house, and it was her who opened the door. Jacob was confused at how quiet the house was. Where are your parents? He asked her as he got inside.
Dad has a lot of things to deal with, and Mom is working overtime at her office.
Sophie shrugged. She went to the kitchen and came out with a bowl of instant noodles in her hands. That's what you're having for dinner? Jacob asked. Sophie answered, nonchalantly.
Yeah, since I don't know how to cook and all.
She then turned to face him and said,
This is the only pack left.
Sophie suddenly thought of something and picked up another fork with the bowl and handed it over to Jacob.
Here, you must be hungry too. Have some,
she offered. Jacob was about to refuse her offer, but then his stomach made a growling noise, indicating that Sophie was right. She was too lazy to get another bowl to split the noodles. Therefore, the two of them settled on the couch in the living room and ate from the same bowl while watching some random show on TV. They had fun fighting over the noodles with their two forks in that one bowl. Jacob was starving, and the instant noodles appeared to be very delicious at the moment. They were both fighting over the noodles like kids and laughing at their stupidity. They fought especially hard over the last bite and didn't even realize how close together their heads were in an attempt to put the last bite in their mouths. They were both embarrassed when they realized that, so they coughed a bit to cover up the flush on their faces.
All right, I made the noodles. Now you wash the dishes.
Sophie threw her fork into the bowl and ordered Jacob. Jacob saw her blush and knew that her heartbeat was probably really fast. He quickly went into the kitchen and loaded the dishwasher.
Hey, it's still early. Let's go to the art district,
she said to Jacob excitedly. Episode 148, The Art District. Jacob thought about it for a moment. It sure was pretty early, but they would have to miss their study session if they went out now, which most probably was Sophie's intention anyway.
Come on, we never go out like this.
Seeing that Jacob seemed reluctant, Sophie urged him impatiently. Where are we going? Jacob asked. He agreed that they hadn't properly spent time together in a while, as he had had a lot of other things on his mind lately.
To Mom's office, and we will come home with her,
Sophie said in high spirits. Jacob thought that it would be nice to actually go and explore the art district a bit, so he agreed immediately. Sophie excitedly told him to wait there while she went and dressed up. Jacob smiled at her antics and sat there patiently while she got ready. They took a taxi and went to the 1825 Art District. The 1825 Art District was situated in the southern suburbs of the city. It had originally been a zone of factories, but the factories had been moved or closed due to the city's environmental regulations. Therefore, a lot of warehouses were left behind, which were later turned into art galleries and offices. Jacob and Sophie arrived at the art district and saw large chimneys and old woven wire fences everywhere. However, as they went inside, tastefully displayed art galleries and shops greeted them. Familiar with this area, Sophie led Jacob to Helen's studio. The iron and steel steps on the stairs banged loudly under their feet while they walked up to the second floor of a red building. Helen's architectural studio was situated there.
Mom!
Sophie pushed open the door and entered the studio. She immediately spotted Helen, who was giving instructions to her employees.
Soph, what are you doing here?
Helen was surprised to see her.
Jacob and I were getting bored at home, so we came here together.
Sophie pointed at Jacob behind her.
Hey!
Jacob greeted her modestly. It was the first time he had visited Helen's studio. The exquisite interior design and the little decorations displayed the lovely artistic taste of the studio.
Aw, Soph has become even more beautiful than before.
The staff members were happy to see Sophie. Sophie was dressed beautifully today, and her big eyes dazzled the young employees. She gave the woman who had made that comment a shy smile before turning back to her mother.
Mom, when will you get off work?
Sophie asked.
Probably in a couple of hours,
Helen said.
Jacob and I will wait for you. Till then, I'll show him around,
Sophie announced. Then, she pulled Jacob out of the studio without waiting for an answer. She wanted to explore the art district, so she made Jacob go with her. Helen looked at them and shook her head. She then turned her back towards the young architects and resumed explaining the key points of the design. Walking out of the red building, Sophie led Jacob downstairs and told him,
There are many architectural studios here, but Mom's is the best.
Looking back at the red building, Jacob guessed that it must have been the office building of a former factory, since it had the best view and ventilation. The fact that Helen could rent a place like that showed her value and capabilities.
There are many interesting things around here, and many artists come here to exhibit their works,
Sophie explained while pulling Jacob toward another big factory building. Knowing nothing about art, Jacob could only tell if a piece of art was good to look at. He wasn't able to describe the reasons behind his judgments. However, Sophie was different. Under Helen's training, she was a natural at the arts. Seeing Jacob's confusion, she took her time explaining each exhibit to him.
This one is an imitation painting of Manet's The Picnic. It comes under the category of realism. And this is Van Gogh's style. Look at the use of bright paint. It is the symbol of Van Gogh's style.
Being dragged along by Sophie in the art district, Jacob listened to her explanations. He marveled at how passionate she was about art and had such extensive knowledge about each painting. She could tell him the history of anything he pointed at. Besides the exhibitions, they also sold stuff. Sophie chose a pile of trinkets that Jacob paid for. Walking around holding her hand, Jacob was tired but also felt happy. The rundown factory buildings, dim illumination, vibrant art, and brilliant artistic talents dazzled his brain with their drastic and powerful contrasts. Huge palm trees lined up on both sides of the wide road, and the swaying trees' shadows and the gusty wind seemed even more enjoyable to him compared with the ones on the university campus. "Do you know that we have a fine arts exhibition this Wednesday at our school?" Jacob asked.
Yes, it's Tom Lester, but you probably don't know his true identity.
Sophie raised her head and said. "What identity?" Jacob asked her.
"He's an inspector,"
Sophie answered. "I know, and he even got his face slapped by Jade and Julia," Jacob thought. But he didn't tell her that, as he knew he would have to tell her the whole story, which would only make her worry.
"Unlike Susan, who is stationed here, he's a patrolling inspector. In general, inspectors are troublesome, but with our great influence here, our clan is not afraid of him,"
Sophie continued. Jacob nodded. His experience told him that their clan was like an actual kingdom and had great power. That was why it was cautious but not afraid of the patrolling inspectors. "Will you come this Wednesday?" Jacob asked her again.
"Do you want me to?"
Sophie asked. Yeah, it would be nice if you came," Jacob said, as he looked everywhere but at her.
"Okay, I will be there then,"
Sophie said with a smile. Jacob grinned, knowing that she would agree with him.
"By the way, which level are you on with the Sword Shadow Scroll?"
Sophie asked. "I haven't checked your homework today, and now you are checking my cultivation progress?" Jacob said playfully. A black car suddenly stopped in front of them. Kenneth stuck his head out of the window. "Soph, look who's back!" He called her out with a smile.
"Uncle Kenneth, aren't you supposed to be in seclusion cultivation?"
Sophie yelled in surprise as her face was adorned with a wide smile at the sight of her favorite uncle. Seclusion, my butt was going to crack." Kenneth opened the car door and got out. His gaze turned weird when he saw them holding hands. Sophie blushed. Fortunately, the light here was dim and Jacob didn't notice it. Quickly, she withdrew her hand and stammered.
"Uncle, how did you know that I was here?"
"Sweetheart, your uncle can find anyone if he wants to," Kenneth answered smugly as he tapped Sophie's nose.
"You are here just in time. I ran out of pocket money."
Sophie reached her hand out to Kenneth. "Of course you are." Kenneth sighed as if he was being robbed. Nonetheless, he took out his wallet and drew out several $100 bills, placing them on Sophie's palm. Who would believe that the number one master in the mortal world would look so vulnerable before Sophie? Putting away the money, Sophie smiled cheerfully.
Uncle, you got out of seclusion early. Aren't you worried that you won't pass the heavenly tribulation next month?
She asked him with a little worry.
Do you think one could pass the heavenly tribulation just by being in seclusion?
Kenneth looked at Jacob and Sophie as he said,
It seems that the South Atlantic has been restless recently. You shouldn't be out by yourself.
Who will dare to touch me with my third uncle around?
Sophie poked Kenneth's chest with her finger.
Right. I'll skin anyone who dares to trouble you,
Kenneth said venomously before turning to face Jacob. Jacob inhaled deeply, feeling like he was an outsider here.
Kid, is it true that you chose the Sword Shadow Scroll?
Sure enough, Kenneth didn't want to make it easy for him.
Yeah.
Jacob didn't like Kenneth, but he forced himself to answer him. Kenneth was not a reasonable man, but he was still Sophie's uncle.
A rubbish technique. I once tried it and made no progress in 3 months. You shouldn't have chosen this scroll.
Kenneth scolded him immediately. Maybe I can make it work, Jacob said.
If you can make it work, I will crawl backwards before you, Kenneth retorted viciously.
Alarmed by the direction of the conversation, Sophie said immediately,
Uncle, why are you so upset with him?
She pushed Kenneth away and said,
You go back now, and I'll visit you some other day.
Don't you want me to drive you home?
Kenneth changed his expression to a smile before asking.
No, it's okay. We'll go back with Mom.
Sophie waved her arm impatiently. Kenneth looked wronged. He had gotten out of seclusion early to visit his little niece, and he didn't expect that he would be driven away by her. Seeing Kenneth driving away, Sophie heaved a sigh of relief, though it turned into a frown just after a moment. She turned to Jacob with big eyes and asked him,
Do you think I was too rude to him?
She was upset with her uncle for not treating Jacob with respect, but she didn't want to make him sad or be rude to him. Jacob sighed heavily, seeing how adorable Sophie could be. He laid a hand on her shoulder to give her comfort and said, in a calm voice, I think that he'll be fine. I don't think he even has it in him to be mad at you. Sophie just smiled at his answer, still a little upset. Did you have a good time when you were away? Jacob asked her, changing the subject.
It was okay. Nothing special.
Sophie kicked the pebbles at her feet. Then silence fell. The streetlights shone on them and left 2 shadows on the road, one longer than the other. They walked along the quiet factory road and returned to Helen's studio, finding the latter was already waiting for them with the car key. Jacob suddenly remembered that Helen drove a Ferrari and didn't have a back seat. Helen, you can take Soph home. It's time for me to return to my dorm, Jacob said.
Okay, thanks for keeping Soph company.
Helen smiled. It was my pleasure. Jacob waved his hand cheerfully before walking out of the studio with them. After saying goodbye to them, Jacob took a bus back to his college. Sitting at the back of the quiet bus, Jacob began to cultivate the Sword Shadow Scroll silently. He has resolved to spend any free time he has on cultivation, since the breakthrough could happen at any moment, usually without warning. The 5 unbalanced elements circulated in his body. Jacob was releasing the inner essence with the 3rd level of the Spirit Concentration Scroll when suddenly a dash of white sword energy shot out from his finger. Episode 149, Nice to meet you." The energy was weak, and it hit the back of the seat in front of Jacob's and vanished. However, it was still a wonderful surprise for Jacob. He almost forgot that even though the Spirit Concentration Scroll was the most basic technique, all the advanced cultivation techniques were built on it. It worked the same way as math. Even the most advanced math equations were based on basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. After being stuck for days, he finally got a feel for it. Jacob tried to condense the 5 elements into his palm with the Spirit Concentration Scroll before circulating Nature Essence using the Sword Shadow Scroll. A cloud of gray energy that vaguely looked like a sword appeared in his palm. "Shoot!" Jacob commanded in his mind while pushing his palm toward the outside of the window. The sword energy flew several meters before the nightly wind blew it apart. Jacob condensed and released it again. The sword energy looked barely like a sword, and there wasn't any power in it. From the rearview mirror, the bus driver saw Jacob, who was swinging his palm toward the window repeatedly, and he thought, with a sigh, "It's a pity that such a fine young man is mentally disabled." The bus stopped at the university, and Jacob jumped off, returning to his dorm to rest. The cultivation on the bus tired his body, but his spirit was high. He felt like he had just solved a complex math problem that had puzzled him for a long time. A sense of achievement and relaxation made him dizzy. Susan had hoped that Jacob could progress steadily, and that was why she had only taught him how to absorb the 5 elements, but not the method of using them. However, Jacob thought through the whole thing and learned how to do it himself. He was one step ahead of his teacher. It was what the top students did. They were always one step ahead of the teacher's curriculum. Now, he could release the vague sword energy at will, though it would consume the nature essence he stored in his body. Jacob practiced while walking, and he only stopped practicing after he was proficient at it. After all, he didn't want to fully consume the precious 5 elemental essences stored in his body. He decided that he would ask Susan tomorrow about how to accelerate his cultivation with the Sword Shadow Scroll and reach the first level faster. However, Jacob was unaware that Tom Lester stood on top of a building and watched him as he was happily playing with a dash of sword energy in his palm while walking into the dorm area. After a light snort, he vanished. The next day, Jacob replenished the nature essence in his body with the Spirit Concentration Scroll in class, feeling like all his acupoints were full of essence again. The bell rang, and Jacob carried a stack of books to return to the library. He had been so busy recently that the books were due before he could finish them. He was about to enter the library when someone called out to him. He turned and saw Kathy, who also had a stack of books in her arms, rushing toward him. "Are you returning books too?" Jacob asked with a stiff smile.
"Why are you looking at me like that? I won't eat you."
Kathy smiled lightly and bumped him with her elbow before walking with him into the library. Today, she was wearing a loose striped dress. Just like her usual clothes, it was simple but elegant.
"Why did you avoid me these 2 days? Did you do something wrong?"
Kathy asked while walking.
"No, it's because of that thing,"
Jacob stammered, knowing that Kathy would understand what he was referring to.
"In the beginning, I was indeed astonished, but now, after some thought, it is what it is,"
Kathy said. The hall on the first floor of the library was divided into several sections by whiteboards. It was being prepared for tomorrow's art exhibition. Jacob stood beside Kathy on the escalator that was moving up slowly. He asked, "What do you mean by, 'it is what it is'?"
"What do you mean by that thing?"
Kathy countered. Secretly admitting defeat, Jacob said with resignation, "I meant the fact that I am the childhood friend you were talking about."
"And 'it is what it is' also referring to the fact that you are the childhood friend I was talking about."
Kathy said lightly. Knowing that Kathy was too smart for him, Jacob changed the subject by asking, "Is your dad back in London?"
"Yeah, a little later than he had planned. I saw him off last night at the airport," Kathy answered.
Jacob thought for a moment and said, "I should have seen him off as well." His childhood memories were vague, but he still remembered that Kathy's dad had always been kind to him.
"It's okay,"
Kathy replied, shaking her head while holding the books in her arms. The atmosphere suddenly became awkward.
"Oh, when Sophie pulled you aside and talked to you after the game, what did she say?"
Jacob asked abruptly.
"Nothing serious. She just asked me if I like you."
Kathy arched her eyebrows slightly and said breezily. Jacob's heart lurched, not daring to ask what her answer was.
"I was actually astonished when I found out that you were Jakey. I feel dumb thinking back to the things that I said to you," Kathy said as she bit her lip.
Then she turned to Jacob abruptly, reaching out her hand to him while holding the books against her belly with the other.
"Very nice to meet you,"
she said. "What?" Jacob froze.
"This is the scene that I had in mind when I met Jakey again."
Kathy reached out her hand and said,
"It is nice to meet you again, Jakey. Let's have a fresh start."
"Fresh start." Jacob smiled, liking the thought. This would take away a lot of the awkwardness they were feeling. Jacob reached out and shook her hand with his.
"You're supposed to say, 'Nice to meet you, Kathy,'"
Kathy said with a smile. The escalator got to the top, and Kathy released Jacob's hand and exhaled deeply, as if she was finally free from the pressure and the burden that had accumulated over the past couple of days.
"Although the beginning is a bit different from what I had imagined, now everything is in its rightful place. We met each other again, and we can start again."
Kathy looked at Jacob and smiled faintly.
"You are Jakey in the second year, and I am Little Carrot in the second year."
Like a clock that had readjusted to the correct time, Jacob's messy thoughts and feelings began to clear with this simple handshake.
"I have 2 questions."
Jacob gritted his teeth and asked.
"You waited for Jakey because you wanted to give him and yourself a chance, right?" "Yes."
Kathy nodded. She had wished for a reunion just like this. Although there might be no result, she had something to hope for.
"What if he didn't show up?"
Jacob continued to ask.
"I honestly don't know,"
Kathy said lightly before walking to the front desk with books in her arms. Jacob followed Kathy to the front desk. After returning the books that she borrowed last time, Kathy walked to the science and technology shelves while Jacob went toward the culture and art shelves.
"I saw Tom Lester yesterday. Wow, he is so handsome. It's said that he has golden pupils. Is that true? My view wasn't clear. I just had a distant glimpse of him directing the arrangements in the exhibition area. He looked so good in his gray shirt." "What are you guys talking about? Tom Lester? I saw him yesterday when he walked past the entrance of the library. His pupils are golden in the sunshine. He's gorgeous."
The girl's gossip floated through the bookshelves and reached Jacob, who was standing in the area. Golden pupils. Jacob clenched his fists as he had a bad feeling about Tom's intentions. A patrolling inspector had suddenly appeared in their city just before Sophie's birthday party. His purpose was obvious. Except for Tom Lester, who had revealed his identity, Jacob wondered how many disguised inspectors were secretly coming here. Sophie's birthday party was a disguised competition of power between the two clans. Saying that it was a display of strength before the war would be pretty accurate. While the South Atlantic was also preparing their forces, Dracon invited seniors and hermits to join his side. Meanwhile, the inspectors would come to the party to see if they needed to intervene. Episode 150, Six Pulses Sword. While the girls were still gossiping, Jacob found the books he wanted and went to the exit to check them out. Kathy had also found the books she needed and walked out from another section.
You have a broad range of interests.
Standing in the line behind Jacob, Kathy couldn't help but comment when she saw books such as 8 Extraordinary Meridians, The 5 Elements, and a couple of other books in his hands. Well, just some light reading, Jacob replied, before turning his head and glancing at the books in Kathy's hands. Kathy, you are the hard-working one. They are all academic books, he commented.
The mid-sem tests are close. I have to find study material on the topics that were not clearly taught in class. I need to study these books together with our textbooks to fully understand everything,
Kathy replied. Jacob smiled at Kathy, seeing her serious attitude towards academics. He thought for a moment before asking, "Can I borrow your notes and make a copy of them?"
You just don't listen in class.
Kathy cast him a disdainful glance before saying,
You can come and take them before the tests.
Jacob was thrilled. Kathy had the best and the most detailed notes in class. They were like exam guides with all the key points emphasized. With her notes, it would take him less time to cram for the exams. However, Jacob felt guilty just stealing her half a semester's worth of hard work. "After the exams, I'll treat you to a meal," he offered.
You want to bribe me with just a meal, huh?
Kathy murmured, but didn't object to it. After walking out of that particular section, they took the escalator to the first floor together. The marble hall on the first floor was now entirely divided into several sections by whiteboards. If viewed from above, it looked like a maze.
It seems like Tom Lester is quite famous,
Kathy said. "Are you a fan of his, too?" Jacob said.
My idol is your...
Kathy almost blurted out. However, she caught herself and said instead,
Tom Lester is said to be quite handsome, but I have no interest in him.
Jacob wasn't surprised. Kathy was a fan of science, and her idols were famous scientists. She didn't have a lot of interest in artists.
But you seem to be interested in art and culture,
Kathy asked, while glancing at the books in Jacob's hands. In the stack of books in Jacob's hands, there were The Most Famous 100 Artists in History and Introduction to Contemporary Arts.
Yeah, just a bit.
Jacob rearranged the stack of books in his arms as he replied. He was very impressed by Sophie yesterday when they visited the 1825 Art District. He felt like an illiterate man in the artistic world, and that was why he borrowed the books. He wanted to familiarize himself with the art, in case they decided to wander there again. The escalator moved down to the hall on the first floor, and they walked along the pathway in the middle of the exhibition area. They were about to step out of the library when Tom, who was in a thin gray windbreaker, walked toward them. Under the admiring gazes of the girls by the entrance, he rested his gaze on Jacob before stepping into the library.
Does he know you?
Kathy asked in surprise.
Not really. I just met him once,
Jacob said lightly. Kathy felt like something was not right, but she didn't want to interfere with Jacob's business too much. After waving at Jacob, she walked toward her bike. The moment they left, Tom, who had walked into the library, slowly turned his head and glanced in Kathy's direction. The moment that Jacob returned to the dorm with his books, he was surrounded by the guys.
Jacob, it's too much. You are the common enemy of all guys. You must treat us to a meal. Hand out the numbers of the twins or you will die.
Jacob looked at them, baffled. "What's the matter?" he asked.
Don't play dumb.
A guy from his neighboring room got even more indignant.
The twins just came to our dorm building and brought you a chocolate cake they baked," he shouted.
"It's too much. We should sentence Jacob to the death penalty," the guys yelled dramatically.
The single guys were furious at Jacob for receiving a cake baked by the beautiful twins. Exasperated, Jacob had to admit that Jade and Julia had a broad range of interests. In their free time, when they were not cultivating, they probably picked up baking cakes.
"Where's the cake?"
Jacob asked as he walked into the dorm.
"We all ate it. Nothing is left,"
Ryan yelled. Jacob rolled his eyes but didn't say anything. These guys were too dramatic for their own good. He wondered what elixirs Jade and Julia had put into the cake they baked and what they would do to the guys.
"Oh no."
One of the guys, who had the weakest stomach among them, suddenly put his palms on his belly and yelled in pain. Right after him, another one's face turned livid too, before he dashed toward the public bathroom on the 3rd floor. One after another, they all rushed into the bathroom. Even Sam, the fittest one of them all, couldn't bear it. He also held his belly and rushed into the bathroom, since he had eaten 3 pieces of the cake. Immediately, the public bathroom on the 3rd floor was engulfed in a stinky smell. Jacob shook his head in exasperation and thought, well, at least the cake is helping them to eliminate the impurities in their bodies, and I guess they won't be vulnerable to any diseases for a couple of years. Several minutes later, Sam walked out of the bathroom with one hand covering his nose and the other one rubbing his belly. However, the moment he reached the door of their dorm room, his face changed and he rushed back to the bathroom. Jacob couldn't bear the stench, so he got out of the dorm building to escape from it. Coming out of the building with him were guys who were on the 1st, 2nd, and 4th floors. No one could bear the overwhelming stench in the building. Jacob walked further away before shaking the little bell on his wrist. Half a minute later, Jade and Julia walked out of the nearest gate of the campus toward the dorm area.
"Master, did you like the cake?"
They walked to Jacob before asking cheerfully while holding each other's hand.
"I didn't eat it. My dorm mates ate it. Now they are all having internal cleansings in the bathroom. What on earth did you put in the cake?"
Jacob asked them helplessly.
"Really? How?"
Julia widened her already big eyes and put her fingers on her mouth, looking innocent.
"Master, knowing that you are fatigued with cultivation recently, we got 6 essence replenishing pills from Elder Liam and ground them into powder before putting them into the cake,"
Jade answered.
"It won't do them harm, will it?"
Jacob asked with a sigh.
"They are all mortal beings who are not toughened by cultivation. The elixirs are too much for them to hold inside, and that is why they are sick now. However, they won't be harmed. Instead, it will help them eliminate any impurities and improve their health,"
Jade said. Relaxed, Jacob thought, it's a blessing in disguise for these stupid, greedy guys. After all, they had a taste of elixirs that are not accessible to mortal beings.
"But we are the cause of their trouble. Shall we go up and apologize to them?"
Worriedly, Julia asked Jade.
"We told them repeatedly that the cake was for you, and they still ate it."
Jade was exasperated. She was a little angry at the fact that the guys had eaten the cake that she and her sister spent half a night baking.
"Oh, I have another thing to tell you."
Jacob opened his palm and revealed a vague gray sword energy.
"Sword condensed with essence!"
Julia exclaimed.
"Master, this is awesome!"
Jacob was embarrassed at Julia's response. Her exclamation was so naive that he felt like a kindergarten kid who was praised by the teacher when he solved 1 + 1.
"How do I use it?"
Jacob asked. Although Susan could teach him the basics, she had not cultivated the Sword Shadow Scroll. Jade and Julia were more familiar with the details of this technique.
You can release it through the center of your palm, or you can shoot the sword energy with your fingertips. It's called the Six Pulses Sword,
Julia said. 6 Pulses Sword? Jacob brightened immediately.
Right now, since your 5 elements are unbalanced, the sword energy contains no power. Otherwise, when you release the sword energy, it would essentially be a dash of lightning since it combines all 5 elements. It would break other elemental techniques.
Jade continued. It sounds amazing. Jacob withdrew the gray sword energy and asked, Did Inspector Tom cause any trouble for you lately?
No, when we fought him yesterday, I felt like he must be in mid